rest and digest, I think, is a state that many of us go into in Italy just because the lifestyle is like that.
Hi, I'm Tanta Croce, and this is Find Your Dolce, the new podcast where we explore joyful living and how to create your Dolce Vita life. I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for joining. Let's get started. Today, I am so excited to welcome Kamin Mohammadi to the podcast. Kamin is an author, journalist, broadcaster, and public speaker. As a highly acclaimed journalist, she has worked for the Financial Times, Harper's Bazaar, Condé Nast Traveler, Grazia Magazine, and BBC World, just to name a few. As a best-selling author, she has published The Cypress Tree, which was also published in Italy as Mille farfalle nel sole, and she's published my personal favorite, the book Bella Figura, which has been translated into 16 languages. Welcome, Kamin. I am so excited to have you here today.
Hi, Danilo. It's so nice to be here. Here's the book. This is actually my Canadian edition, you guys. So, lovely to see you. The one you've
I
got.
love it. So, Kamin, let's dive right into the book because that's sort of how this all got started. It's how you and I connected and how we met. And I wanted to sort of talk about the title. What does it all mean? So that way people can understand where you're coming from, essentially. So Bella Figura in Italian, it's a core concept. It's all about presenting yourself with grace, polished appearance, good manners. Now, does this align to the definition that you have for Bella Figura?
Well, it's such a good question. And thank you, Danilo, for giving a wonderful, not just a definition of Bella Figura, but being a Bella Figura. I mean, you are always the epitome of it. Yes, I mean, I take that, essentially in this book, what I've done is I've taken that concept of the Bella Figura as understood, by Italians. And I've sort of slightly played around with it. So I've made it a kind of program, if you like, of my own, where it's like the Bella Figura method, and it's completely based into that. But it has a quite a mindful sort of quality, particularly, mindful eating, I would say. So it comes out of the concept, the Italian concept of Bella Figura, and the heart of it is to make everything that you do as beautiful and as joyful as possible. And there are, this comes with recipes. It's about what you eat, how you eat it, what your relationship is with your food. As you know, Italians are passionate about that. And as soon as, you have a relationship with your food and the produce, then you have to have a relationship with the seasons and with the land, So it's all of that, and how we can actually, as potentially burnt out, sort of busy people, take that concept of Bella Figura, as I define it in my book, and use it to help ourselves live better, healthier, happier lives, So it is a kind of self-help concept, but it's definitely not a sort of, I'm dictating to you how you should do it,
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I find that, I think that's why we align so well, because I find that perfectly goes hand in hand with what I do with Viva la Dolce, right? It's not necessarily a prescription method, but it's just sort of this inspiration, and inspiring it is indeed, because I just loved your book. I want to understand, where did it come from? So what was going on in your life that inspired you to write Bella Figura?
Well, do you know, Danila, I arrived in Florence 18 years ago, I think this week, So I was I'm Iranian by origin. I grew up in London. Am still a journalist, magazine editor, all of these things. And I had just gotten a commission to write my first book. Now, I was in London. I had, worked to kind of the top of the tree, as it were. And it didn't really work out the way that I had hoped. I was really burnt out. I had all sorts of kind of, if I say health issues, that's not accurate. There was nothing wrong with me, that the doctor could find. But I probably had a lot of this kind of issues that a lot of us have all the time, of just not, always being tired, piling on weight, terrible skin, not able to just, having this kind of fat cortisol belly. I mean, now we have all these words, but remember that, I'm talking about this 20 years ago. So I was not doing really well. And I was very unhappy, and I was very sad and depressed. And I was just extremely burnt out, I think. I didn't really realize it at the time. And then by a series of mishaps, let's say, or chances, and I won't give away, I ended up in Florence, and I was just meant to be there for sort of 6 weeks to just start to write this book that I'd been talking about and that I had a commission for. And that was because somebody wonderful who's become a great friend, she had a flat in Florence. We met. She was also a writer, and she saw that I was struggling with my life. And she suggested that I go to Florence and borrow her flat. And that was 18 years ago, Daniela. I haven't left.
Wow. That is so cool, though. I mean, I love it, right? It's just like meant to be. Destiny took
Mhm,
over. That's so cool.
mhm.
In your book, you talk a lot about that particular area in Florence. I feel like I've been there just because you described it so beautifully, the people, the sounds, the ways of
Mm.
life, those
Yeah.
everyday moments. And I feel like it was such an important part of the book. What was it that struck you? Like, what made you feel so connected to that? Especially you were saying you came from London. So what was it that really struck you about that everyday Italian life?
Do you know, yeah. So the neighborhood that I was in was San Nicolò, which obviously is still there, and I absolutely loved it. It's changed, of course. We're some years later, and going to the market in Sant'Ambrogio, which is what is still the very very much the locals kind of fruit and veg market. Loved this slow, more, what the Italians call human kind of way of life, where within 2 days of being there, I knew everybody on my street and everybody knew me, and we had no common language. And I loved that. Yeah, I'd come from London where you rush around, you don't look anyone in the eye, no one knows anybody. It's all about being anonymous and private. And instead, this was not like that. People had the time, they were curious, they saw you, and they acknowledged that they saw you and that you existed. So in those first few days, I would see somebody sort of, let's say, in the neighborhood, and then later on I'd see them somewhere else in the city. And the fact that it's a very small city is helpful too. And they would stop and they would say, "Oh, ciao." And that to me was extraordinary because, in London, for example, at my job, I'd been walking up and down a particular corridor for 8 years and walking past the same people, and we never even looked at each other, let alone 8 years, So I think that aspect of it, the human aspect of it, the fact that people were sociable, they had time, they were curious, they wanted to say hi. And then, the other bit was when I went to the market and I met Italian produce. And it
Italian
was
first.
fresh Italian produce. The markets. I've always loved markets. Markets so lively. But you know what it reminded me of, and this is what surprised me and what I wasn't expecting. The market transported me back to my childhood in Iran. And, going to the bazaar with my grandmother, the fact that, you'd go, and we Iranians, Iranian culture, have such a passionate connection to our food. We love our food. We love our ingredients. And this is what it reminded me of, to walk into the market and to see this bustle and to see day by day how excited the market traders were, and even the customers, because, oh, this new thing is in season. It just came in today, and it was so beautiful, and I realized that all of these years I had just hated going around big supermarkets and sort of seeing, fruit and veg kind of offered in a sort of plastic coffin, and you know what I mean? I loved being back in that ambience where everyone was excited about the produce. Everyone was and it had, the salad had mud on its leaves, like it was all being dug up from market gardens right outside Florence. So I think that those were the two really key things that made me feel really happy and really at home immediately. That sense of the humanity, if you like, of being seen and being acknowledged, and people being curious about you, and then that connection with the food, the produce, the land, and my own culture.
It sounds beautiful to have those amazing relationships. And I love how the two connected, the two countries, the two experiences connected. It really dug that out of you, which is really beautiful. I think that's sort of one of the specialties of Italy. I think it does that for a lot of people, perhaps, because you have that moment to slow down and reflect a
Yes,
little bit more, right? And
very
then, there
smart.
are, yeah, these interesting experiences that deeply connect like you had. Sounds to me like all of this took a part in your healing, because I know, obviously you were there writing, but healing at the same time. Is there anything else that you can say, maybe a daily habit or ritual? Because I know Italians are famous for that you sort of also took into your healing.
My goodness, yes, Danila, there are so many. But I will tell you the key thing. In fact, I should have come prepared, but it's in the other room. Olive oil. You know it. You know it's going to be about the fresh olive oil. So I was told pretty early on that that it was really important what kind of olive oil I had. And so I got, and I'm a journalist, right? So if you tell me this is good, I'm going to go and investigate it for 2 days and come up with all the science and the statistics and do a deep dive. So I did a deep dive. And I realized that, extra virgin olive oil, and particularly what here we call the green olive oil. So it's the first press. So it is it comes out green, literally, is extraordinarily prized, right? It's really prized here. You will know this. When it's new oil season, it's so exciting. Everyone's so excited. Everyone's running around. Have you got your new oil? And sometimes that's just all you eat for a while. It's just, a plate of this lovely green oil, a bit of salt, a lovely bit of traditional Tuscan bread. So the daily olive oil, I learned a lot about it. I learned a lot about its healing benefits. And I took I was told was an old sort of Tuscan wives recommendation, which is I took a spoonful of olive oil 4 times a day. And I thought, I'm just going to put on more weight. And I didn't. And I would say that alongside everything else, which is why I made the Bella Figura method. I wanted to pass this on. I wasn't trying, when I went there, I wasn't trying to heal or lose weight or clear up my skin or detox. I'd given up on all of that. I just was sort of sad and desperate. I just was trying to write my book. But all of those other things happened, and I'd been a glossy magazine editor in London, and I just tried everything. I tried everything. I tried every possible, and I got given all possible treatments and new diets and habits and things, and nothing had worked for me. Nothing had worked, and it was really distressing. And then I came to Florence, and after 2 weeks of walking a lot, because I walked everywhere, walking a lot, eating pasta, gelato, drinking the odd glass of Chianti, the odd little bit of pizza, and actually taking 4 teaspoons, spoonfuls, actually, not even teaspoons, tablespoons of olive oil a day. And I would say within 2-3 weeks, I started, my jeans were loose, my skin had cleared up. And there is a scene in the book where and I promise you, I didn't even make this up. It literally was like this. I was in the cafe I always went to in the mornings, and the fruit and veg guy came around like he always did, and he wheeled his fruit and veg past me as he always did. And I always smiled at him, And this morning I smiled at him and he crashed into a table and all his fruit and veg. And on the way back, he dropped a little note on my table going, "Do you want to go out for a drink?" And that day, 3 men crashed. Like, this guy crashed his fruit and veg. Another guy, as I was walking over the bridge, went and sort of, his moped went off to the side. And then the third was the manager of another cafe that I used to go to, who had showed up after being away, and he came out, and we smiled, and he stumbled. Now, this isn't because I suddenly had sort of plastic surgery. I was the same person as the day before, but this is what happened, because it's like I got shiny.
Yes. That's a good way to put it. And I think and a lot of people, they go to Italy and they have this similar experience,
They're
I
shiny.
myself, I did too. I remember going and like you said, eating all the things and, indulging and losing weight. And I was like, whoa. And I think like you're happy. The surroundings are beautiful. The food it tastes great. You don't feel sluggish, as you said. So there is definitely a magic. I think that's part of why many people fall in love with Italy. But I also think, this is maybe one of the keys to the longevity of Italy. So, often we hear, Italians grow old, well into their old years because they connect with family, they have good food, etc. So you've lived and breathed it. You have an example of it. Would you say that this kind of, it's true? Like you're right there, you're living there. So what do you think?
I I really think so. Danila, I think everything that we now have as lists of kind of what we should do in the middle of our busy lives, it is actually basically that. I mean, I'm so happy you have always the same experience when you come here as well. It is that we're happy. It is that things are slower. I think that's a really key part. I've gotten quite deeply in my work, in my other work as a sort of holistic sort of, I don't know, therapist, teacher, practitioner, gotten really deeply into also lots of different disciplines and nervous system stuff. First of all, that thing of slowing down, you know, it's it's amazingly good for us, right? So that in itself, you have fight or flight when you're dysregulated and stressed, and the opposite of that is rest and digest. Okay. So you think about, the vagus nerve and sort of how it works, and that nerve is deeply connected to the belly. So um, rest and digest, I think, is a state that many of us go into in Italy just because the lifestyle is like that. It's slower. Cities are walkable, so we tend to do a lot more of that. I would walk everywhere in Florence. I mean, I still do. Um, and food is fresh. Okay. And I think that all of those things make a really big difference to all of that. And the community, the family. But, even if you don't have family, um, it's even the evening passeggiata, that everyone goes out to see and be seen. But it's like, it's where you see everybody. It's where you see how people are. It's where you understand, where's your neighbor, the old lady? Oh, she had a fall. And then everyone will take turns and, cooking for her or doing her shopping. It's that. And even in big cities, I think in Italy, there is still that sense, in neighborhoods, that sense of connection. And I think that does help people to live longer. I was doing a piece once where I was living in Tuscany with my husband, going up into the mountains. I was doing a great road trip, kind of great drive piece about this. And I was just curious one day. I went into this cemetery. It's quite high up and it's Tuscany still, but going towards Emilia Romagna, right? Danila, I promise you, I didn't find anybody buried there who was under 90 something years of age. And there were so many who were in the hundreds. And lots had been buried with their dogs because they went hunting. I mean, it was so touching. But it really, there are so many of those places, towns, villages in Italy where people live to this enormous age. And that's because, I mean, you can't say people don't have stress. It's life. Everyone has life. Everyone has stress, but they have maybe a different sort of stress. They have healthier lifestyles, not in the way that we think of a healthy lifestyle. I had my matcha latte and I went to the gym. They are slower, they eat cleaner, they eat fresher, they hang out, they laugh a lot together.
It's interesting how you mentioned about the laugh because I often incorporate proverbs into some of my work. And this is because I've grown up listening to this. So whenever there was a problem, my parents would come out with this little like rhyme riddle, and you're like, what? Like you're kind of like stopped in your tracks, you're midway through your tears and they come up with this funny thing. And I'm like, okay. But it really sort of puts you back into like reality, right? Like, okay, this isn't the end of the world, and so I find in my experience in Italy with my family, that is something that helps them too. It's like the way that they deal with stress is kind of like, you know, like it's, I don't know, they kind of laugh it off, or they have these like old age wisdoms that they're like, listen, my ancestors went through this and this is what they used to say, you know? So I don't know. It's different.
Love that you mentioned your proverbs as well, because I think that thing of the proverbs, it gives you as well a sense of continuity and connection, which I think can also be quite healthy and rooting. And as you say, I think it gives you this point of view of, well, you know, we all survived, and everyone's gone through this, and you are kind of part of something greater. So maybe even in that, again, you lose that sense of isolation, which I think is so bad for us, you know?
I love that. Thank you for framing it like that. That's beautiful. And speaking of coming together, I would love for you to discuss the different retreats that you have, because you're talking about the food and coming together and spending time, and you're working on something right now which offers exactly that. So please let us know more.
Absolutely, Danila. Well, so because we've worked together, I also work as a writing teacher. Both of my books, including Bella Figura, have been memoirs. So for various reasons, I kind of started to do that online in the pandemic. And now, actually, I also teach creative writing at some universities in Florence, funnily enough. So within my writing work, whenever I teach, even memoir writing, Bella Figura is part of my blood now. So whatever I do, it is a Bella Figura thing. Before the pandemic and even after, I ran just because people asked me to, and if fans and readers of the book were coming to Florence and they wanted to meet me, I devised a little sort of Bella Figura tour, so that depending on how much time they had, we could spend some time together with my city, as it were, my Florence, and alongside that, we would do some Bella Figura type practices. But now that's really deepened. So I've developed these sort of modalities around the teaching of the writing. One is called writing as medicine, and that is something that we do as a sort of therapeutic practice. But again, within those therapeutic practices, writing practices, the bedrock of them is the Bella Figura method. So it really is about slowing down, connecting with nature, connecting with the food that you're eating, connecting with the seasons. So as soon as you are that deep into Bella Figura, then of course it's just a tiny step back to the soil itself. And now this is one of the most exciting new things I've got going on. This year, well, I already started last year, but this year we're doing 4-day masterclasses. So that's really exciting. I'm partnering with a really wonderful, regenerative, sustainable, organic farm in Umbria, just over the border from Tuscany, called Quinto Sapore. Everything that they do is done with love, and I think that is the Bella Figura method, absolutely done with slowness, done with, a combination of going back to old techniques, but combining it with like the most innovative and cutting edge to really regenerate the soil. You would just, oh my God, you would love their produce so much. That it's just, it takes me back, to my first days in the market where my eyes were just on stalks for like the beauty of a cabbage, So their food is extraordinary. It's beautiful. It's really nutrient rich, because it comes from all the work that they've done on the soil. So we have actually hooked up. So we're offering a couple of 4-day masterclasses called My Garden Grows Stories. So we use what the boys who run the farm, we call them the twin farmers, because they're twins. So we use what the twins already have on offer as an experience, which is a morning spent in essentially the sort of vegetable garden part of the farm. Really finding out about what their story is, what they've done, and actually the stories of the produce, the nature, the plants themselves. The most fascinating thing, you see all of these varieties of, let's say, aubergine that they have, and then they have a little white one that looks like an egg, and they say, well, was, one that sort of came out of the Americas, and indeed is why, it's called eggplant in America. Fascinating things like this. And while they do that, we also do writing exercises that help to connect us to the land, to nature, to ourselves, and to our own kind of family stories. Then there is the boys make us lunch, just from the farm. So it's a complete soil to fork experience, So it's 4 days of being together, masterclass. We're really living the Bella Figura lifestyle right down to the very from the root up, from the roots up, from the very soil upwards and through that, because to me the Bella Figura method has always been about living in a way that is extremely healing for you, for the earth, for the land that we occupy, for our families, for all of that. So it's really an attempt to put all of that together. But we're going to be living and eating and loving the Bella Figura way, for 4 days. And I'm so excited, because what they do is at Quinta Sapore is just the most extraordinary sort of expansion of that whole sense of the Bella Figura life, of doing everything with love, with beauty, with joy, with full respect of the earth that we come from, of the land itself.
That sounds like a dream. So I'm so happy to hear that you're doing this and offering this to others. And, it makes me think about how this has evolved. When we first met, you had your book and then you started to do those tours, as you said, around the city. And, it's amazing to see how this has evolved now into these different retreats. So it's beautiful because your book has so much to give. And so I love how it's sort of developed into these different things. But just like those retreats have changed, I imagine the city that you fell in love with has changed. You did sort of allude to that earlier. So what can you tell us a little bit about those changes and maybe how, if it's affected anything of this like Bella Figura life?
Yeah, thanks for that, Danila. Florence, like many places in the world now, really suffers from this thing that we call hypertourism. Florence, of course, has always been popular. It's always been a touristic place. But I would say that in the past 10 years, it's gone so dramatic. And already before the pandemic, it was really overwhelming. But since the pandemic, it's just sort of, multiplied even further. So the figures are staggering, really. I mean, this is Florence at the end of the day, it's a world-class city, and this has always been its charm. It's a world-class city. It's very international. It is a living, breathing outdoor museum, but actually it's the size of a big village,
Right? Yeah, it is. No,
actually, in
that's a good
terms of,
point.
so it's anachronistic, and that's been its charm, that you could live in a place that was so extraordinary, and yet know all of your neighbors and know if the old lady had gone to her doctor's appointment, who lives across the courtyard from you, that kind of thing. Of course, what's happened, because this is a new sort of tourism than the tourism we had when I arrived 18 years ago. This is very much powered by tech, by Airbnb, by those platforms. And unfortunately, what it's done is, we have a city of permanent residents of about 385,000. So, well under 500,000, under 400,000. And I read a statistic that says that I think for the past 10 years, but certainly for the past 5, an average of 3 residents a day have been moving out of Florence, where we had something like 16 million visitors maybe last year, the year before. So where are those people going to live and sleep, Danilo? You know this. The whole of the Centro Storico is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You cannot, close a window without permission, let alone knock down a building. You just can't do that. It's not like in London where you just knock down a building and you put up, one much bigger, and you can accommodate everyone. So all of those millions of people who are coming to Florence have to stay somewhere, and then once, of course, trends in travel changed and people wanted to live like a local. Originally Airbnb was such a great idea because it was about people's spare rooms, right? So you would go and you would stay with a local in their spare room and you'd get to know them, and it was wonderful. And there's a little bit of that still, but really, 90% of Airbnbs in the city now are operated by a bunch of companies. The statistics are shocking, really, when you look at it. We also have something like 65 American universities who have branches in Florence.
Hey, I didn't know that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and that in itself is so, study abroad, it's a huge thing. We have, I think, something like that also in Rome, but think about how much bigger Rome is, compared to Florence. So even though they only stay for a semester, we have a permanent population of American students that went up actually. So when I was making my documentary at the very end of 2024, the population of American students was 18,000. Last year it went up to 20. That's the average stable population, even though they change, every semester. So look, that's 5% of Florence's complete population. So that just the students themselves, you can imagine what an impact they have on the city and how much the city changes itself to cater. Of course it does, to cater to them. So, matcha lattes, muffins in centro, great. We have a little bit more choice, but a lot of the old Florentine places have really been wiped out. Rents, of course, have gone up massively. So what you call little, mom and pop stores, the little independent places that are really the heart and soul of little towns in Italy, a lot of them have gone out of business. A lot of shops have closed that would have offered services to locals, and they've only been replaced by bars and restaurants and things that cater instead to tourists. So a lot of our neighborhoods have been really hollowed out. They're no longer catering to residents. So that's why people are leaving. And I have to confess, I left too. 6 months ago, I left Florence and I went somewhere where I can really live and revisit this original true spirit of the Bella Figura, because in Florence now, it's harder. It's still there, but it's harder because when you come out of your door and you have 500 people queuing up on your street because they want to get a glass of wine from a wine window because they saw it on Stanley Tucci, it really massively affects one's lifestyle and the social fabric of the neighborhoods. So neighborhoods have been gutted because now 90% of, apartments and buildings are Airbnbs. So of course that has impacted that sort of social fabric, that kind of ecosystem, the Bella Figura ecosystem,
Yeah. And this is so important to talk about because I don't think people really realize. So I'm happy, we're taking this platform, this opportunity to talk about this because I also think perhaps you can lend some ideas, maybe they've crossed your mind, of what can tourists do to maybe remain, more respectful so that way we don't lose it completely.
Absolutely. What a great idea, because I think the thing is that it is easy to do that. I guess the thing to not do, if at all possible, and I get that this is a really big ask, because for a lot of people it's their dream and they've come a long way, and maybe you have a one in a lifetime chance of going all that way to Italy, and you only have 2 weeks because you work, and that's just the reality. So what are you going to do? Not go to Florence, not go to Venice, not go to Rome, go to some lovely little hilltop town? No, of course people want to go to those big, you have to, I do respect that, But yes, there are probably some ways that you can make it better. I mean, one of the things that is really bad for the city is what they call eat and run tourism, where people take tours, and so therefore they don't stay in Florence and they get bussed in for the day. They've already prepaid everything. So they're not even actually kind of spending money, and they're coming in and they're just having a quick tour of Florence and they're being taken out. Those are the big groups that crowd museums, that stop you being able to walk down our tiny narrow streets. They make congestion, and they also, because they're very budget, those tour groups, mean that you have all of these sort of terrible restaurants mushrooming in the center where, the Italians wouldn't be caught dead eating, right? So I would say that if you are going to visit, I would say Venice and Florence, you want to kind of keep, if you possibly can, if you are going to stay in like an Airbnb, see if you can bear to stay in someone's spare room. That way you will actually meet a local and you know that some granny hasn't actually been, I have characters in my book in Bella Figura, La Mamma di Antonella, who was evicted from her central apartment. Now I don't think any of my readers would want to stay in an Airbnb if they knew that that meant that, somebody like La Mamma was thrown out at the age of 88, and had to move to the outskirts and therefore lose a lot of her own social life and social fabric in the way that she had lived. So those are the impacts. So I would say, really, if at all possible, just avoid kind of Airbnb. There are so many amazing hotels. The hotels, there are so many, and they cater to all budgets. And also you pay the tourist tax in hotels, and that tourist tax goes directly to actually funding some of the institutions. And I don't know if Airbnb has caught up with this now, but some years ago it hadn't. And if you are going to use Airbnb or one of those kind of platforms, see if you can really pinpoint a place. And that would really be, if you go back to the original way, which is stay in someone's spare room, and then that way you automatically have somebody who can guide you around the city, who you can become friends with. If you can, another thing I've been recommending to friends and readers, and some of my readers have become friends because they come back, every year, and they really teach me a lot. And in fact, one of the things I've learned from them is most of them don't stay in Florence anymore. They'll pick somewhere that's on an easy train line, and they will stay in a small, tiny town where their presence doesn't negatively impact the town. In fact, it positively impacts it, because everyone is happy to have them. The way that tourism should be, right? Everyone is delighted. They get to really make a difference to the restaurants and the wineries and the small businesses that are in that town. They make friends, and they can just do day trips, into town. And spend a day in Florence, see the things that they want to see, but really not add to the sort of, not just congestion, but this sense of neighborhoods being hollowed out and becoming just these empty shells that are just filled by people who are passing through for 2 days. I can't tell you how sad it is when I'm in because when I go back, I stay in San Nicolò. When on a Sunday I come down, on a Sunday, you never used to have to make a plan with anybody, because you would just walk out and you would see everybody, and you'd have a coffee with this one, and then you go, oh, let's do this with this other person. And now on a Sunday I come out and it's so sad. The street is so full of people, but like there's no one that because no one is local. Everyone is passing through. So I now I can't. Do you see what I mean? So it changes your whole lifestyle.
For sure. It definitely changes everything. And thank you for being honest about it. Because, when you look at online, of course, we're getting the fantasy version of all of this. So it's very important to be aware of this side of our beloved places like Florence. So thank you. And,
Absolutely.
I wanted to talk about, because you're talking about change, and how places change and you have to adapt, and it brings to mind your other work. So, you did speak about your Iranian heritage, and I think about how you've covered the strife that's happening there. And I think to myself, what has life taught you about rebuilding after loss, after upheaval, and how do you deal with that? How do you sort of look at these different things that have changed and move on?
Oh, Danila. Well, You know that we're in the middle of terrible things happening in Iran right now, so it's very emotional for me, and I really appreciate you asking. I mean, I think that, so much of the world is in so much turmoil that I guess resilience is something we all need to be looking at. I think as I get older and wearier, um, I think more and more and more I come back to the key thing. It's community. Community. Find your community, find as many communities as you can, whether they're online, but if possible, make them in real life. Because, I told you I moved to this lovely, beautiful the Umbrian town. And I came back this morning from having been away for work for a few days, and just walking the dog and having my coffee and going to a couple of shops and running my errands, I bumped into 3 or 4 people that I know, Italian small town life. And everyone was so kind, and they all stopped and they took the time and they asked, how are you and what news of your family? They just moved me so much. Like I cried 5 times on my morning walk. But it was really beautiful and it really touched me. And I thought, that's the crux of it. That's the crux of it is to, as much as possible, to build human connection and to cultivate those communities, because I think that's in this day and age of disconnection, of isolation, I think our power, our resilience, and indeed our resistance is our connection to ourselves, to each other, to the land, you know. So community all the way, community and Bella Figura. I mean, cooking together. This is the kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes. No, it all makes sense. And you know what? Thank you. I love the way you put that together. I love how, it's sort of like no matter where you are, whether it's Italy, Iran, Canada, wherever you are, it is about creating that community and real genuine connections. So I love that idea. Yeah. And you know what? I think we've seen it all firsthand after the pandemic, how important it was to come back together. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for what we were just talking about with Italy and how it sort of has that naturally infused community, just the way things are set up. So, maybe for the rest of us who don't live in those close quarters or doesn't have the same vibe, we need to sort of be mindful of that. So, thank you for that reminder.
Well, find a way, I think, even in our sort of very frenetic modern city lives, find a way to make that, in whatever pockets that you can.
Yes, yeah, and on that point, I wish you lived closer because we do this thing called serata, where I would love to have you out for a night and we dance and we do all these sort of things because that's exactly what we're trying to do, create this community. So yes, I think it's very important to create that community and to sort of keep all these things in mind and to keep all these different practices in mind. And what that brings me to is your daily dolce. So I always ask all my guests, how do you keep your dolce going? Is there something you do every day or maybe almost every day? What is that for you?
Well, I love the Daily Dolce. I'm going to put that up on my fridge and maybe do a little notebook where every day I find, what was my Daily Dolce? What should be my Daily Dolce? I think, honestly, okay, I mean, this is really basic, but I love my cup of coffee in the morning. First, it can literally make or break the day. And then I absolutely am so thankful to my little dog, who you can't see, she's just behind here. Because of her, come rain, shine, snow, water, whatever it is, I have to get out 3 times a day, especially first thing, and have those really, really long walks. And I think that was something that, in Bella Figura, it was like I didn't have the dog, but it was the practice was walking a lot, and I do really love, my walks. And nowadays, when I'm in London, I still, whatever happens, at least once a day, I have to take a nice big sort of hour-long walk. And if I can be out in nature, you know, so a little bit of outside, fresh air, move your body, just, that's really my joy.
That sounds lovely. I love that. I have to actually incorporate that. That's one thing. I'm with you on the coffee, but I have to get out and do a little bit more walking
You need
because,
a dog,
yeah,
darling.
it's good for you. I know. Yeah, I've been told that many times. Well, it was such a pleasure. It was such a pleasure speaking with you, Carmen. Thank you for, your insight on La Bella Figura, La Dolce Vita, and even the realistic changes. So I'm glad we touched upon that too. So thank you so much. I will be sure to tell all the listeners and the viewers exactly how to figure out how to connect with your beautiful retreats, because maybe that's something they want to do. So that information will be all in the description, and they can find you on Instagram as well. Do you want to say your handle?
Absolutely. It's just Kamin Mohammadi. It's just my name. Quite simple.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Carmen. Take care.
Thank you, darling. It's been such a pleasure. Mwah.
Ciao.